Dr. John Bizon joins us this morning, and State Representative Dr. John Bizon, good morning to you.
Good morning, Tim. It is so great to be with you this morning.
Yeah, it'd be nice if I could figure out what microphone you're on there.
I'm speaking to both of them, if that would help.
Well, try that one.
1, 2.
Oh, I think I got you.
I love when you have me, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, so I forgot we crossed the wires here at some point a while ago. But welcome to the studio. Great to have you on the show again today.
Oh, it's always a pleasure to be here with you and Richard, and always enjoy being able to reach out to my constituents, sir.
You're just about at the end of your very first term, a 2-year term.
It is. We're going to be just wrapping up session. Last evening was the end of activities in the House that were scheduled sessions until mid-October, and then we'll go back. We have 1 day scheduled in mid-October, and then we'll be back after the elections again.
How do you like the job?
To tell you the truth, I have to say I got a lot more satisfaction out of medicine, out of being there, helping people. You know, down there, you meet a lot of people, but the entire environment is so much different than what I'm used to over the last 30, 40 years, that in medicine, it's the world of trying your very, very best to do no harm, and it's you and the patient against the world. And when I go to Lansing, it's making decisions for 10 million people at a time. And for me, that has been a different mindset. That has been a different culture than what I'm used to. I struggle over each and every one of my votes, knowing that it's going to be helping some people in. And I still go in there with the attitude of do no harm, but I'm afraid that it's converted into the least harm possible, because when you deal with 10 million at a time, it is a different mindset that you have to have. The other part of it, the satisfaction part, I found a much greater satisfaction being in my office and working one-on-one and helping individuals at a time, taking them off to surgery and getting the cancer out of their neck, and celebrating our victories and crying over our defeats.
A bit more black and white, you know. It's more hands-on, and you see the immediate results. And
very much so.
Yeah, but you don't know. When you vote on a bill, you don't really know what the long term is going to be. You hope it's going to be good in the long run.
The other thing, that the culture is so different. Here we have one guy in the back of the room saying, hey, this is a good bill. And when you look at the data just isn't there. You know, they haven't done the studies. In the world of medicine, we expect a medicine to work 19 out of 20 times. We expect there to be studies that say that, yes, this regimen is going to be helping most people. But when you go up there, it's one guy saying, I've got this great idea, and it goes into a bill. The bill comes out, and it's before the rest of the committee. And when you ask, is there the data to support the results we want, there typically is not the data, and there's also not the information on what are the unintended consequences of this action, much like we saw a couple months ago when we moved one of the insurance companies from one department to another department. We moved it into the licensing and regulation department, not realizing that then they'd be eligible for some $80 million a year in tax credits and tax refunds that they otherwise would not have had in the other department. And so we had to make another bill that I voted against, but they said, yes, we want all of this money back again.
I see we had a story today that Governor Snyder has named a top doctor in Michigan part of a public health advisory commission that he's creating to these are moves recommended by a task force that deemed state government to be primarily responsible for Flint's lead contamination. Do you think if we would have had trained medical people more involved, we could have averted this?
Averted is a strong word, because we had employees that it appears falsified the records to make it look like there was not a problem. And if that's the case, avoiding may not be the correct term, but one of the very first things that I did when we had this crisis is I went down to Flint to talk to the medical doctors and said, hey, what's going on? How can we help? What's the deal out here? And I sensed their frustration with the State Department, the State Department of Environmental Quality, with the State Department of Health and Human Services, and with the EPA at the federal level. They said there is something wrong here, and yet they were being poo-pooed by these bureaucrats who felt that they knew the rules better than anyone else, perhaps didn't understand the meaning for the rules, but no, I think that having someone from the medical profession in there would have allowed for a quicker realization that, no, this is not right, that regardless of what the others are saying, we need to look more quickly, and it would have arisen to the level of the governor a whole lot quicker than it did. Right now, the medical executive that they are talking about is the medical doctor that is the consultant to HHS, the Health and Human Services Division, and typically would report to the director of HHS. And now we're going to be moving that medical doctor, who is also on staff now at U of M, so has access to a lot of research possibilities and educational opportunities, is going to be now reporting directly to the governor, so the governor will have nothing. It should be getting first-hand information rather than second- and third-hand information as he was early in the Flint crisis.
All of this kind of brings me to a question about term limits, because opponents of term limits, when we enacted them here in Michigan, said, you know, what's going to happen is you're going to have bureaucrats with more clout, more power, and more influence in state government, because they're going to be the ones there year after year, and we're changing out our state reps every 2 years or every 4 years. Do you feel merit to that?
There is a great deal of merit to that argument, that when we said there are going to be term limits, we did make the decision that the bureaucrats are going to be the ones who are going to be running much of the day-to-day activities of the government. You have the administration. The administration is the other branch that had significantly benefited in the terms of power from the fact that, at least in the House, we typically have younger people excited to be there, lots of ideas, and from that standpoint, I think that there is some benefit. But we've made the decision to empower the bureaucrats and to empower the administration in running this state. And, you know, I think that it's important, and I have voted for that separation of powers. There are times when I have taken votes saying, no, we don't want to give the governor even more power in his ability to handle the budget. Making a budget is the responsibility of the legislature, and that's something that we need to continue to look closely at.
But at least the governor and the legislature are accountable to the voters every election, whereas these bureaucrats really not all that accountable. And as we've seen, bureaucrats at the federal level, even when they're caught by the press and scrutinized for some wrongdoing, they often keep their jobs.
They do, and that was one of the complaints that we had in the House, that many of the people who were involved with this Flint water crisis, we could not get out of their positions because of the way the rules were written. And I think that there is still an appetite to go back there and change some of those rules dealing with the security of those bureaucrats in their job when they are obviously not doing a good job for us.
I know you've co-sponsored some legislation to help local governments replace water lines. I want to get to that when we come back. Also talk about a bill that you have just had passed through the House that you worked on a great deal about open records in Michigan. Yeah. Dr. John Bizon, our state representative from the 62nd District,
yes,
is with us today on WBCK. State Representative Dr. John Bizon is our guest this morning, and we're talking a little bit about some legislation that you have worked on. One of them has to do with the Flint water crisis and a bill that helps local governments replace water lines made of lead. How does that work?
This is a bill that was sponsored by, I believe it's a bipartisan bill with both Democrats and Republicans signing on to it, where we're going to be trying to get a fund together so that communities can replace their water lines. I know that at the federal level, there's also movement in the same direction where they're talking about a revolving fund where you could take low-interest loans or grants and replace the water lines. And the latest numbers that I have seen have suggested that the water in Flint is meeting the national EPA standard of less than 10% having anything more than a very little bit of lead in the water. But still, it's important to go ahead and get the lead lines replaced, not only in Flint, but across the state. You have to understand that the infrastructure problem will probably run into the billions of dollars if you were to say that this is a statewide problem, given the lines that we have in Detroit, the lines that we have here in Battle Creek, the lines in Grand Rapids, and they're everywhere. This is the way we used to do the plumbing.
Yeah.
And
my dad had a job out of high school putting them in, lead pipe. And I remember growing up, he had a pile of lead pipe that, he'd gotten, they were throwing away that we had around that we used for a long, long time. But it was nasty stuff back then. But that's what's down there. And this is the tip of the iceberg in Flint. I predict we're going to see these in other communities.
Oh, I'm sure that it is. Typically, you have that biofilm that kind of coats the pipe and keeps the water away from the lead that would be otherwise in the pipes. But when you get rid of that biofilm is when the pipes begin to leach that lead. And as long as that biofilm is there and the pipes are going to be safe, the water is going to be fine, and we're working hard on making sure that biofilm is up as well.
I think the answer short term is going to have to be technology. They've got to come up with something that'll recoat those pipes or some way to put some kind of a liner inside of them, because it's just going to be astronomically expensive and difficult to dig up every lead pipe in this state.
I know that there was a firm out of California that offered to come in and put in the new PVC pipes to donate the pipes for the Flint water crisis. And I'm not sure that the mayor had taken them up on that. I'm not quite sure of why not. It seems like it would be a much more modern answer. I know that in many of the new houses, they aren't even using copper anymore. They're moving over to the PVC, the plastic pipes, or for their piping. And so I think there are going to be opportunities, as you say, to look and see how we can move on going into the future.
You had a bill pass the House on Wednesday. It expands the Freedom of Information Act in Michigan. How so?
Well, I have to say that I'm particularly proud of this legislation because it was last Thanksgiving when I was on Teletown Hall with a couple hundred of our constituents from here in the area. And we were doing a survey on various topics. And when it came over to transparency, we had like 98% of the people online say yes, they want to see transparency expanded. And so the following week, I sent down to LSB, the Legislative Service Bureau, the people that do the drafting of the bills, my request for a bill that would make the legislature responsible to the Freedom of Information Act, to have them included in the Freedom of Information Act. And I have to admit that I did not think that it would go very far because it didn't seem like it was a terribly popular idea with the leadership, but it actually did grow legs, that there was significant support, bilateral support from those on both sides of the aisle for not only my bill, but they had some other bills in mind as well to make it more transparent, and so this year blossomed into a 10-bill package. And we just passed that 10-bill package through the House this past week. It's going to make the governor's office subject to FOIA. It's going to make the legislative offices more open, in that the calendars will be open to any appointments with lobbyists. It'll make... if you have a constituent that is a lobbyist, it's going to allow for that information to be revealed, but yet it protects the individual constituents. That if you are not registered as a lobbyist, you're still going to have privileged exchange of information with me. We will not be releasing any birth dates or any social security numbers or any other classified information with this series of bills. And I think that they did a very, very good job building in the protections for our constituents, and yet increasing the transparency that is going to be seen in both the administration and the legislature.
What's the prognosis for passing it through the Senate?
That's going to be a little bit more challenging. They have a much smaller body there. I don't know if the appetite is there, but the Senate is still going to have a number of days in session before the election. I would encourage everyone to get in touch with their senators and make sure that they take up this legislation that has been sent to them.
Very well. Before we go, we've got a big national election that everybody's talking about, and surprisingly, some Republicans are coming out and endorsing the Democrat candidate, Hillary Clinton. Are you endorsing anybody?
I do not anticipate making an endorsement in the presidential race this year. I think that there are a number of issues that is attached to the presidency, to include the appointment of Supreme Court justices. And I think that, in my mind, that will take perhaps a paramount decision. It's going to perhaps direct my decision towards the candidate that I anticipate supporting, but I don't anticipate making a formal endorsement in the presidential race.
But you know who you're going to vote for?
I do know who I'm going to vote for.
Okay.
I think that we need to have a conservative Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is a position that oftentimes can be held for 25, 30 years. This is going to be a long-term decision. And yes, I'll be supporting the Republican agenda.
Dr. John Bizon, we'll cut it right there. Thanks for spending some time with us, and we'll talk to you again next time.
Thank you so much, Tim, for having me.